Hi, this is Denise Mathew, and today I'm going to make this bangle style bracelet that has a clasp on it. So for people who don't like to try and stick their hands through bangles, this is an ideal way to make a bracelet. You can also use a lighter wire, so you don't have to use a real heavy wire that you usually would have to use with a bangle if you're using a wire to make it. I use 3 short tube spacers, but you could use a longer tube spacer if you prefer. If you wanted to just have it all the crystals, you could. The tube beads do give it a little bit more stability, so if you have that option, that would be good. And I think this would look really nice with a multitude of crystals or gemstones or whatever you want. I think there's a lot of potential for it, but I like the idea that it actually really does fit like a bangle when you have it on. So let's get started. So what you're going to need is something to wrap your bracelet around. So you don't need this type of thing. If you have just a glass or something, that will be sufficient for the bangle size that you want. Now, a bangle is a little bit bigger, so I'm going to make one that's probably about 8 inches. So what I want to do is just take some wire. Now, ideally, if you used a half hard wire, that would probably work better. If you don't have half hard wire, what you can do is just take some wire straightening pliers and just run it along your wire a few times, and that will start to make it a little bit stiffer, and that's what you want, because that way it will hold the shape better, because the whole point of this bracelet is it's like almost like a faux type bangle. So I'm just running it up, and you can notice it's getting a little bit stiffer. So now that that's done, I'm just going to make sure that when I cut the wire, I've already cut it, but what I want to do is I want to cut the length of wire I want around my wrist, but I also want to have probably about 3/4 of an inch on each side as well, and that will be to make the loops. So that's something to keep in mind. So it's very simple. You're just going to, now I'm using these tube beads. They're 30 millimeters by a 1 millimeter diameter, and they're a little bit curved. So I'm going to use 3 of these. You could use 2 or you could use 1 if you have a longer one. You could use it a little bit a bigger diameter. If you don't have tube beads, you could use other beads instead to break up the thing, or you could just go all the way with crystals. The nice thing about the tube beads is that they're going to give because it's like a faux bangle, you're really dependent on the wire, the strength of the wire, to keep it sort of in a circular shape. So this is just an added protection to keep your bangle sort of round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the tube beads on, and I'm working with a 22 gauge wire. Now, if I had a bigger tube bead, I would just put 1 tube bead on. I also have these 3 millimeter crystals. So I put the tube bead on, and I'm just going to separate it with these crystals. So that's what I would have. And it's quite loose when you first put it on, but that's completely fine. You can always adjust that. Now you want to center your tube beads so that there's equal lengths of wire on both sides. So I'm just going to put another crystal. These are just like a faceted crystal. And you could use colored crystals. You could use pretty much anything you want. It's your choice, whatever you have on hand. I'm using a smaller bead to make it a little bit more delicate, but again, you could use a bigger bead. But just keep in mind, if your beads are too heavy and your wire is a lighter wire, it won't keep its shape because it'll be almost too heavy for it to manage. I put on the 3 tube spacers, and I put 1 bead in between just to separate them. And it's just going to help to give it that curve, because they don't actually fit nicely together, the tube beads, so that's why I put that there. All I'm going to do is start to put on more of these crystals on each end. Now I'm just going to start working on one end, and what you're going to do is you're going to have equal amounts of crystals on both sides. You can count your beads if your beads are bigger, but if you prefer, you can also just measure the length of how many beads you have. So for instance, I would have 1 inch of bead or something like that, and then I would want to have 1 inch of bead on the other sides. So just start to put the beads on. And what you're going to do is you're going to bead it right up until you have the desired length, or close to the desired length, because you also have to take in mind your clasp and your chain tag or loop, whatever you're using. So I would do it just probably an inch under, But to get the perfect measurement, what you want to do is measure how long your clasp and your loop or chain tag are, so that will have everything exactly the right length. But you also have to remember it is a bangle type of bracelet, so it is going to be a little bit looser. So if you have it a little bit longer than you want, it'll probably be just fine. So I'm going to continue to put these crystals on. So that's what I'm doing. You want to make sure that when you're actually putting the beads on, you try and keep it in a bit sort of round. You don't really want to stretch it out much because the whole intention is that you want to have a round bangle shape. And if it loses its shape, you just kind of bring it back into shape. I will shape it at the end when I have added my loops on the end and my clasp and so forth. You can measure how much you have, if it's going to be the right thing, or if you want, you can just take your whatever you're using to measure and just put it around there and see how close you're getting. So for the 8, I still have a little bit of way to go. All right, so I think we're pretty close to where I want to be. I have this little device that keeps the beads on, so I'm just going to put that on. You don't have to do that. If you want to put a piece of tape or something on, you can do that as well. And what that will do is keep the beads on so they don't fall off when you're making your other loop. So I'm just going to take my round nose pliers and I'm going to make a loop. So just a 90-degree angle right around my pliers. Like that. Now if you wanted to add another accent bead like a silver bead or something like that just to show that it's come to an end, you could do that as well. But I'm just going to keep it like that. This would be where you would either use a chain tag or a closed jump ring for your clasp. So I'm just going to close that loop now. So that's what I have. The good thing about using this other bead, I think it's called a bead stopper, the good thing about using it is that you're going to have equal amounts on each side of your bangle so that you're not having, it doesn't all slide over to one side and then you have one longer length and one shorter length. So this is kind of keeping your lengths about the same. And that's why tape would work just as well, but again, something to keep your beads in place while you work on the other one because it's almost impossible to do. So I'm just wrapping the rest of that wire around. I like to use crimp pliers, just the round part, just to make those wraps a little bit rounder. And it also tucks in that little piece of wire so it's gone. So that's what I have on one side. And then on the other side, I'm going to remove this bead stopper. And I'm just going to do exactly the same thing, just a 90-degree angle, and then just a loop. And then just add the clasp. And then I slid on my clasp, and I'm just going to close that up. And when you're closing it up, you want to kind of push down on your beads. So if you notice, everything's nice and tight. I don't want anything loose, because if it's loose, the beads are gonna slide all over the place. You're gonna see the wire underneath, which is not really what you want to have, but also it will not make it as stiff as you want it to be, because you want it fairly stiff to have that bangle appearance. So I'm just wrapping it around, wrapping it right in that piece of wire until I have no more. And then I can use my crimp pliers, but if you don't have that, that's fine. You can just use your chain nose pliers just to tuck everything in. And that's what I would have. So now all you need to do is clasp it. Open up your clasp. So if you have your cylinder type thing, I just slid it right on and kind of pushed it, and it's helping to make it a little bit more circular. Because those beads are tight against the wire, it's holding it pretty good. So that would give you the illusion of a bangle. I especially like the idea that you can use just plain wire rather than having to use beading wire, because you don't have to have crimps or crimp caps or anything like that. You can just do a couple loops on the end and you have your bracelet ready to go. So I hope you liked this tutorial. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. We'll see you next time. Thanks for coming. Bye for now.